The brand still burned against Mercy Whitmore's shoulder blade, 3 weeks after they'd pressed the hot iron to her skin. The letter W seared into her flesh. Whore, they'd called it, though the real crime was loving a man whose skin was darker than Mississippi mud. She lay face down on the narrow bed in the boarding house outside Natchez, listening to rain drum against wooden walls. Each drop sounded like the voices that had followed her through the streets, voices that spat nigger lover and race traitor with Sunday prayer fervor. Mercy. The voice came soft from the doorway. She turned slowly, wincing. Thomas Jefferson Williams stood in shadows, his carpenter's hands holding water and clean cloth. 3 weeks of running had carved new lines around his eyes, but his gaze remained steady, the same look that had caught her attention across the church social, back when loving him had seemed possible. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If they find you, let me worry about that." He approached slowly. "I need to change the dressing." The irony wasn't lost on her. A freeman caring for a white woman punished for seeing his humanity. "It's getting infected," Thomas said quietly. "We need a real doctor. No doctor's going to treat me, not after—" She gestured toward the brand that had made her untouchable. Thomas's hands stilled. "There's someone. In Cairo, Illinois. A Quaker woman who runs a clinic. She doesn't ask questions. Illinois is 5 states away." "I know." She searched his face for doubt, for the moment when the weight would break his resolve. Instead, she found the same determination that had stood beside her in that courthouse when her own family had turned away. "Why risk everything for someone like me?" Thomas sat on the bed's edge. "Someone who saw me as more than skin color? Someone who chose love over the easy path? Someone who got you run out of town, cost you your business, your home?" "Mercy." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I've been a free man for 15 years, but I've never been more free than the day you took my hand in front of God and everybody. Whatever they do to us, they can't take that away." Outside, rain intensified with the sound of horses' hooves. Thomas moved to the window. "Riders," he said. 3 of them." They both knew it wasn't just anybody. Word traveled fast about a white woman and black man traveling together. The bounty would bring out every desperate man with a horse and gun. Thomas gathered their few possessions, her medicine bottle, his carpenter's tools, his mother's Bible. Everything they owned could fit in a single saddlebag. "Can you ride?" he asked. Mercy pushed herself upright, ignoring the fire through her shoulder. "I can do whatever needs doing." At the back door, he paused and looked into her eyes. "Once we leave here, there's no turning back. No safe place until we reach Cairo." "Are you certain?" Mercy thought of the life she'd left, the comfortable house, social standing, predictable future as a respectable widow. Then she thought of the alternative, hiding who she loved, pretending love was shameful. "I'm certain," she said. They slipped into the rain-soaked night, 2 figures moving toward uncertain future, carrying nothing but each other and fierce belief that justice existed beyond small-minded hatred. Behind them, riders drew closer, torches hissing, voices calling for blood. But ahead lay 5 states of possibility, hope that somewhere in this fractured country, love might exist without apology. They traveled by night through Arkansas backcountry, following paths that existed only in whispered knowledge of those who understood running. Thomas knew these roads from stories his father had told, stories of walking them in chains 40 years earlier. The Quaker network stretched like invisible threads through the South, connecting safe houses and sympathetic souls. But the network was fragile, dependent on trust and timing. "There," Thomas pointed toward a farmhouse where a single candle burned in the upper window. "That's the signal." Mercy clung to his back as their borrowed horse crossed the muddy field. 3 weeks of riding had hardened her body, but the brand still pulled at her shoulder. Infection had set in, despite Thomas's careful tending. The farmhouse belonged to Ezra Morrison, a Quaker minister whose sermons about human dignity had earned him enemies. He met them at the barn door, lantern in hand. "Brother Williams, Sister Whitmore, thee are welcome here." Inside, Morrison's wife Hannah waited with food and bandages. She examined Mercy's wound by lamplight, probing the angry red edges where infection had taken hold. "This needs more than field medicine," she said. "The brand was done with a dirty iron. The poison has spread deeper than I can reach." Mercy felt Thomas tense. They both knew what infection meant: delay, weakness, vulnerability that could get them killed. "There's a doctor in Memphis," Morrison said. "Dr. Samuel Hayes. He's sympathetic to unconventional cases." "Memphis is 2 days in the wrong direction," Thomas said. "And if the infection spreads to her blood, thee will lose more than time," Hannah replied. "She needs proper medical care or she'll not survive the journey." They spent the day hidden in the barn while Mercy drifted in fevered sleep. When awake, she listened to Thomas and Morrison planning routes, calculating distances against time. "Bounty hunters were in town yesterday," Morrison said, "asking about a white woman traveling with a colored man. They're offering $50. Thomas's jaw tightened. $50 was more than most farmers saw in a year. "How many men?" Thomas asked. 4, maybe 5. Professional hunters. They know their business." That evening, Morrison pressed supplies into Thomas's hands: laudanum for pain, carbolic acid for wounds, and a letter of introduction. "Tell Dr. Hayes that Hannah Morrison sent thee. He'll understand." They rode out under clear sky, stars visible for the first time in weeks. Mercy rode behind Thomas, arms around his waist, feeling his steady breathing. The infection made her weak, but his presence made her strong. "Thomas," she said as they crossed into Tennessee, "if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen. Promise me you'll keep going. Find your freedom, even if I can't share it." Thomas reined in the horse and turned to her, face serious in starlight. "Freedom isn't a place you find. It's something you carry inside. And the only freedom worth having is the kind we can share together." He kissed her forehead, gentle as a blessing. "Now stop talking nonsense and let me concentrate on keeping us both alive." They rode through the night toward Memphis, toward hope of healing, while behind them bounty hunters followed their trail, drawn by silver dollars and the satisfaction of punishing love that dared cross the color line. Dr. Samuel Hayes had seen many strange things in his 20 years practicing medicine in Memphis, but nothing quite like the couple who appeared at his back door after midnight. The white woman burned with fever, her shoulder bearing a branding iron's unmistakable mark, while the black man who carried her moved with careful dignity. "Hannah Morrison sent us," Thomas said, showing the letter. Hayes read quickly, his face grave. Hannah's words were brief but clear. "These souls carry more than their own freedom. Help them if thee can." "Bring her upstairs," Hayes said, "quickly, before someone sees." He laid Mercy on the examination table and unwrapped makeshift bandages. The infection had worsened, angry red streaks radiating from the brand, her skin hot, breathing shallow. "How long since the branding?" Hayes asked. 3 weeks, Thomas said. "We've been traveling, couldn't get proper medical attention." Hayes nodded grimly. He'd seen similar brands: punishment for adultery, theft, speaking against established order. But this was different. The letter W had been carved deep, designed to scar permanently. "Blood poisoning," he said. "Another day or two and—" He didn't finish. "What can you do?" Thomas asked. "Clean the wound properly, drain infection, give her medicines to fight fever. But she'll need time to recover. Days, maybe a week." "We don't have a week. There are men following us." Hayes looked up. "What kind of men?" "The kind who think love is a crime worth killing for." The doctor weighed the implications. He'd helped runaways before, but always discreetly. This was different. A white woman and black man, branded for their love, hunted by men who wouldn't hesitate to burn down his clinic. "I'll need to operate," he said finally. "Remove infected tissue, cauterize the wound. It won't be pleasant." Thomas took Mercy's hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "Do what you have to do." Hayes worked through the night while Thomas whispered comfort. The operation was brutal, cutting away infected flesh, burning the wound clean, stitching what could be saved. Mercy screamed until laudanum took her under. Dawn was breaking when Hayes set down his instruments. Mercy lay still, breathing more regular, the redness beginning to fade. "She'll live," he said, "but she can't travel for at least a week." Thomas slumped in his chair. "Doctor, we're grateful, but I know, the bounty hunters." Hayes washed his hands, thinking, there might be a way. "My wife's sister runs a boarding house, respectable place. She might hide you in plain sight." "A white woman and black man? People will notice." "Not if you're traveling as mistress and servant, widows taking house slaves north to sell them. Nobody looks closely at what they expect to see." Thomas felt his stomach turn. The idea of pretending to be Mercy's slave went against everything he'd fought for, but he understood the logic. Sometimes survival required swallowing pride. "There's another problem," Hayes continued. "Word spreading about your case. The story of a white woman branded for loving a black man, it travels fast. By the time you reach Illinois, half the country will know your faces. What do you suggest? Change your story. Become someone else. I have connections in Cairo, Quakers who can provide new papers, new identities." Mercy stirred on the table, eyes fluttering open. "Thomas?" He was beside her instantly. "I'm here. The doctor says you're going to be fine." She tried to sit up, winced, lay back down. "How long?" "A week, maybe more, but we'll find a way to wait safely." Mercy looked from Thomas to Hayes, reading the tension. "What aren't you telling me?" Hayes spoke gently. "Your story has spread beyond Mississippi. There will be people looking for you all along the route. We need to give you new identities." Mercy understood immediately. "You want us to pretend he's my slave?" "It's the only way to travel without suspicion." She closed her eyes, thinking of the ironies. Branded for loving a free man, now forced to pretend he was in bondage to save their lives. "Can you do it?" she asked Thomas. "Pretend to be less than what you are?" Thomas thought of his father's stories, of years in actual bondage, of dignity that sustained his family through decades of degradation. Sometimes freedom required temporary sacrifice of pride. "If it gets us to safety," he said. "If it means we can be together without hiding, then yes." Mercy squeezed his hand. "Then we'll do it, however long it takes. But when we reach Illinois, when we're truly free, no more pretending." Hayes nodded. "I'll make arrangements. You'll be the widow Margaret Thompson, traveling north to sell your house slave, Jefferson." Outside, the sun climbed over Memphis, bringing sounds of a city waking, merchants opening shops, steamboats whistling, ordinary business of people who didn't have to hide their love or fear for their lives. But in the small room above the pharmacy, 3 people planned a deception that might save 2 lives and prove that love, even when forced underground, could find a way to survive. The boarding house smelled of lye soap and disappointment. Mercy sat in the common room, playing the role of Margaret Thompson, a widow traveling north with her late husband's property. The performance felt like swallowing glass. Thomas stood behind her chair, eyes downcast, holding the satchel that supposedly contained his ownership papers. The forged documents identified him as Jefferson Thompson, house slave, aged 35, skilled in carpentry, valued at $800. "Mrs. Thompson, is it?" The woman across from them smiled with predatory friendliness. Such a burden, traveling alone with property to manage. Mercy forced herself to smile back. "Jefferson has been with our family for years. I trust him completely." The woman's gaze flicked to Thomas, assessing him like livestock. "Fine specimen. You should get good money for him in Illinois." Thomas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mercy touched his arm lightly, the casual contact a mistress might make with valuable property, and felt the tremor of rage he was controlling. "I'm hoping to find him a good situation," Mercy said. "Skills?" The woman laughed. "Honey, where you're going, they don't care about skills. Better to sell him quick before he gets ideas above his station." That evening, alone in their shared room, Thomas paced like a caged animal while Mercy watched infection drain from her shoulder. The wound was healing, but the role they were playing carved new wounds that couldn't be treated with laudanum. "I can't do this much longer," Thomas said quietly, standing there while she talked about me like I'm not human. "I know." Mercy's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she rebandaged her shoulder. "But it's working. No one suspects who we really are." Because they can't imagine a black man and white woman choosing each other freely, because the only relationship they can accept is master and slave. Mercy looked at him directly. Is that what you think I see when I look at you? Property to be managed? Thomas stopped pacing. No, God no. But playing this role, it brings back things I thought I'd buried. He sat beside her. My father used to tell stories about the plantation, about standing silent while white folks discussed his value like they were pricing cattle. He said the hardest part wasn't the work or whippings. It was pretending to be less than human while keeping your humanity alive inside. Mercy took his hand, feeling calluses that spoke of honest work, free work, chosen work. How did he bear it? By remembering who he really was. By holding on to the parts of himself they couldn't touch. Thomas squeezed her hand, and by believing that someday his children would be free to love whoever deserved their love, even if that someone was white. Thomas smiled for the first time in days, especially then. He said true freedom would be when love mattered more than color. A knock interrupted them. Thomas immediately shifted into his slave persona, eyes down, posture submissive, while Mercy called, "Come in," with authority. "Doctor." Hayes entered, carrying a medical bag. "Mrs. Thompson, I've come to check on your injury." The examination was brief. The infection was gone, the wound healing cleanly, though the brand would leave a permanent scar. Hayes pronounced her fit to travel within days. "I've arranged passage on a riverboat to Cairo," he said quietly. "Captain Jeremiah Mills is sympathetic to travelers in unusual circumstances." After Hayes left, Thomas and Mercy prepared for sleep in the narrow room that housed their deception. They'd grown skilled at maintaining their roles even in private, never knowing when someone might be listening. "Thomas," Mercy whispered in the darkness, "when we reach Illinois, when we don't have to pretend anymore, will you still want this? Want us?" "Every day for the rest of my life," he said. "But I want the real us, not the performance we've been giving. The real us includes a woman with a branded back and a man who's been forced to play slave. We're both scarred now." Thomas turned toward her. "Then we'll heal together, build something honest from the pieces they tried to break." Outside, the Mississippi River flowed north toward freedom, carrying steamboats and stories, dreams and cargo, hopes of people who believed that somewhere upstream lay a place where love could exist without explanation. In 3 days, they would board Captain Mills's boat and steam toward Illinois. But tonight, they held each other in the space between performance and truth, between the roles they played and the people they truly were. The steamboat, Liberty's Daughter, churned north through muddy water that reflected gray sky and broken dreams. Mercy stood at the rail, watching Tennessee slide past, while Thomas arranged their belongings in the tiny cabin assigned to a widow and her property. Captain Jeremiah Mills was a weathered man whose hatred of slavery burned quietly behind careful eyes. He'd been running cargo north for 15 years, using his legitimate shipping business to hide human freedom. The Liberty's Daughter carried cotton and tobacco on her manifests, but her secret cargo was hope. "Mrs. Thompson," Mills approached with deference, "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory?" "Quite satisfactory, Captain." Mills glanced around, noting who might be listening. "We'll reach Cairo day after tomorrow, God willing. I'll have someone help with your business arrangements when we dock." Mercy understood. The business arrangements would involve transforming Margaret Thompson and her slave Jefferson back into Mercy Whitmore and Thomas Williams. That evening, as the boat tied up at a wooding station, their performance was interrupted by commotion near the gangplank. 4 men on horseback had arrived, clothes dusty from hard riding, faces carrying the lean hunger of professional hunters. "Bounty hunters," Thomas said quietly. One hunter was speaking with Captain Mills, showing him a wanted poster. Even from distance, Mercy could see crude drawings. A white woman and black man wanted for inciting racial discord. The reward had increased to $100. Mills glanced toward them once, face carefully neutral, before denying seeing anyone matching their description. "Check the passenger manifest," one hunter demanded. "Of course. though most of my passengers are cotton merchants and their property. Nothing unusual about a widow traveling north with a house slave." Mercy forced herself to remain calm as hunters boarded the boat. They walked among passengers, scrutinizing faces, comparing them to poster drawings. When they reached Mercy and Thomas, she was ready. "Gentlemen," she said with cool authority, "is there some problem?" The lead hunter, a man with tobacco-stained teeth and dead eyes, looked her over carefully. "We're looking for fugitives, ma'am. A white woman and colored man traveling together." "How scandalous," Mercy replied with shocked propriety. "I can't imagine any respectable woman consorting with such people." And the hunter's gaze shifted to Thomas, who stood with perfect slave posture, eyes down, shoulders bent, the picture of subservience. "Boy," the hunter addressed Thomas, "you seen any strange folks on this boat?" Thomas played his role perfectly. "No, sir, master. Just regular folks like my mistress here. Don't pay much mind to other people's business, sir." The hunter studied Thomas for a long moment, looking for deception. But Thomas had learned his performance too well, had perfected appearing less than what he was. "Where are you from, boy?" "Tennessee, sir. My mistress is taking me north to sell me to a new master." The hunter consulted his poster again, comparing the crude drawing to Thomas's face. The artwork was poor enough to allow doubt, and Thomas's submissive demeanor fit every stereotype. "You," the hunter addressed Mercy, "got papers for this one?" "Naturally." Mercy produced forged documents with bored efficiency. "Everything's in order, I assure you." The hunter examined the papers, looking for forgery. Dr. Hayes's connections had done excellent work. The documents appeared authentic, complete with official seals. After what felt like hours, the hunters moved on. Mercy and Thomas maintained their roles, even as their hearts hammered. When hunters finally left the boat, Captain Mills approached them. "Close call," he said quietly. "They'll be checking every boat from here to Cairo." "Will we make it?" Mercy asked. "We'll make it," Mills said with grim determination. "I've been running this river for 30 years, and I've never lost cargo yet." That night, as the Liberty's Daughter steamed through darkness toward Illinois, Mercy and Thomas lay in their narrow bunk, holding each other, without speaking. They'd come so close to capture, so close to being dragged back to Mississippi in chains. "One more day," Thomas whispered. "One more day, and we'll be in free territory." "Will it really be different there?" Mercy asked. "Will people really accept us?" Thomas thought of stories he'd heard about Illinois, a free state, but one where prejudice still lived in hearts and laws, where freedom was a legal concept that hadn't yet reached all corners of daily life. "It'll be different," he said. "Maybe not perfect, but different, and different is enough to start with." Outside their window, the river flowed north toward Cairo, toward Illinois, toward the promise of a place where their love might be allowed to exist without hiding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight they had survived another day, proven once again that love could endure even when the whole world seemed determined to destroy it. Cairo, Illinois, sat at the confluence of two great rivers like a promise half-kept. Free soil, the signs proclaimed, but freedom wore different faces here. Legal but not social, promised but not delivered. Mercy and Thomas stood on the dock as the Liberty's Daughter unloaded her cargo, watching passengers disperse into a city suspended between north and south, between slavery and freedom, between what America was and what it might become. "Mrs. Thompson?" A young woman approached, her plain dress marking her as one of the Quaker network. "I'm Sarah Garrett. Dr. Hayes sent word you might need assistance." After weeks of performance and deception, here was someone who knew their real story, who offered help without judgment. Sarah led them through Cairo's muddy streets to a modest house. Inside, they found a gathering of people who looked like ordinary citizens, but carried themselves with quiet determination of those who had chosen conscience over convenience. "Welcome," said an elderly man with kind eyes. "I'm Elijah Garrett, Sarah's father. We've been expecting you." For the first time in weeks, Mercy and Thomas dropped their performance. Thomas straightened to his full height, looked people in the eye, spoke with the voice of a free man. Mercy let her guard down, allowed herself to believe they might actually be safe. "The brand," Sarah said gently, noticing how Mercy favored her shoulder. "May I see it?" In the privacy of the Garrett home, Mercy removed her shawl and blouse, revealing the healing wound that marked her as surely as any scarlet letter. The assembled Quakers examined it with clinical detachment of people who had seen too much injustice to be shocked. "We've seen similar marks," Elijah said, "though not often on white skin. The courts are becoming more creative in their punishments for those who challenge social order." "What happens now?" Thomas asked. "Are we truly free here?" Elijah and Sarah exchanged glances. "Legally, yes. Illinois is free soil, but the Fugitive Slave Act still applies, and there are those who would see you return south for the bounty. Then we're not safe anywhere." "Safety is relative," Sarah said, "but justice might be possible." She produced a newspaper from Springfield. The headline read, "Branded Woman Seeks Justice. Illinois Court to Hear Unprecedented Case." Mercy stared at the words, unable to comprehend their meaning. "I don't understand." "Word of your story has reached the Illinois Supreme Court," Elijah explained. "They're willing to hear a case challenging the Mississippi verdict, arguing that one state cannot brand its citizens for legal activities in another state." Thomas frowned. "But we weren't married legally. We had no legal standing in Mississippi." "No," Sarah said with a slight smile. "But you do here. Illinois recognizes common law marriage between free persons. In the eyes of this state, you've been legally married since you declared yourselves before witnesses." The implications hit them slowly. In Illinois, their relationship was legitimate. The brand on Mercy's back was not the mark of a criminal, but the scar of an innocent woman punished for legal love. "They want us to testify?" Mercy asked. "If you're willing. It would mean publicity, scrutiny, reliving everything you've endured. But it might also establish precedent, making it harder for other states to punish love that crosses racial lines." Mercy and Thomas looked at each other, weighing costs against possibilities. They'd suffered enough, risked enough, lost enough. The idea of willingly subjecting themselves to more scrutiny felt overwhelming. But they also understood what their case could mean for others. The mixed-race couples hiding in shadows, the children born of forbidden love, the families torn apart by laws that treated affection as criminal. "If we do this," Thomas said slowly, "if we tell our story in court, what guarantee do we have that justice will prevail?" "None," Elijah admitted. "But injustice certainly prevails when good people remain silent." That evening, as Cairo settled into darkness, Mercy and Thomas walked along the riverfront, watching the confluence of waters that had brought them to this crossroads. The Mississippi and Ohio rivers met here, their different currents creating eddies and swirls before flowing north as one. "I'm tired of running," Mercy said finally, "tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be less than what we are. The trial would make us targets again. Every newspaper in the country would carry our story." "Let them," Mercy said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "Let them see what their laws did to us. Let them see what love looks like when it's branded and scarred and still refuses to die." Thomas took her hand, openly, without fear, without looking around to see who might be watching. "You're certain?" "I'm certain that I love you. I'm certain that love shouldn't require apology or explanation. And I'm certain that if we don't stand up for ourselves, who will stand up for the others?" The trial began 3 weeks later in the Springfield courthouse, drawing spectators from across the Midwest. Newspapers sent reporters, politicians made speeches, clergy delivered sermons about divine will and human law. Mercy testified about the brand, the pain, the injustice of being punished for loving a good man. Thomas spoke about freedom, not just legal freedom, but the freedom to love without fear, to build a life based on character rather than color. The opposing lawyers argued that states had the right to regulate moral behavior, that Illinois should not interfere with Mississippi's sovereign decisions. But Mercy's scar spoke louder than their words, a physical reminder of what happened when law served prejudice rather than justice. The verdict came on a gray November morning. The Illinois Supreme Court ruled that one state could not criminally punish its citizens for behavior that was legal in another state. More importantly, they declared that the branding of Mercy Whitmore constituted cruel and unusual punishment, setting precedent for future cases. But the real victory came afterward, as Mercy and Thomas walked out of the courthouse hand in hand, no longer fugitives, no longer hiding. They were legally married, legally protected, legally free to love each other in the state of Illinois. "It's not perfect," Thomas said as they stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters and well-wishers. "There will still be places where we're not welcome, people who will never accept us." "Perfect was never the goal," Mercy replied, touching the scar on her shoulder that had become a symbol of their struggle. "Justice was the goal. And sometimes justice is just the beginning of change, not the end of it." They settled in Springfield, where Thomas opened a carpentry shop, and Mercy taught school to children whose parents cared more about education than the color of their teacher's husband. They faced challenges, whispers, occasional threats, the daily work of proving their worth to a skeptical world. But they also found allies, friends, a community of people who believed that love transcended the artificial boundaries others tried to impose on it. Their story inspired other mixed-race couples to emerge from hiding, to claim their right to love openly and honestly. Years later, when visitors asked about the scar on Mercy's shoulder, she would tell them it was the mark of a journey, not just across 5 states, but across the distance between hatred and hope, between the world as it was and the world as it could become. The brand had been meant to mark her as a criminal, but instead it became a reminder that love, even when branded and scarred, could survive anything. It became proof that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion was simply refusing to stop loving, even when the whole world seemed determined to make you stop. In the end, they had found their justice, not in the courtroom alone, but in the life they built together, the example they set, the hope they offered to others who dared to love across the lines that others drew. They had carried each other across 5 states to find not just legal freedom, but the deeper freedom of living authentically, without apology, without shame. Their love had been tested by fire and marked by iron, but it had endured, and in enduring, it had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who would follow the path they had carved through the wilderness of prejudice toward the promised land of acceptance. The scar remained, but so did the love. And in the balance between those two truths lay the measure of their victory, imperfect, incomplete, but real enough to build a life on, real enough to offer hope to others still making their own dangerous journeys toward freedom.